What do you see in this Emesis Blue clip? Did you miss this?
Hey, Doc.
Yes?
What did you mean when you said, I'm not the first? You talking about the accident?
There have been others.
What did you see, Doc?
You don't want to know.
You don't want to know. But do you want to know? Why do you think Medic said this? What exactly is it that he knows? If you are a big fan of Emesis Blue, you probably know that this partially alludes to Medic's involvement with respawn machine defects in the prequel of Emesis Blue, Spy's Disguise, which at first glance appears like a more light-hearted, stereotypical SFM from the time. But there are details that even the longest Emesis Blue video essays didn't fully cover, that in fact connect the dots between not only the two Emesis Blue installations that exist, providing an even deeper look at fan theories about the respawn machine and hallucinations, but also tying the fabric to the unreleased Emesis Blue sequel, Murder Inc., giving us an insight into what might happen, who might appear, and what themes will be tackled, and in what locations, allowing us to predict the conclusion to one of TF2's most anticipated movies of all time. In fact, I haven't seen anyone talking about these Murder Inc. theories at all, nor about more of Medic's potential inspiration for his backstory in a now unlisted animation by Fortress Films. For example, Richter Overtime, through a message with the creator of Emesis Blue, Chad Payne, revealed that the spy from the prequel actually appears in Emesis Blue in this scene. We see a flash of SO9, the spy from the prequel Spy's Disguise, indicating that Spy's Disguise is in fact not a prequel, but takes place during Emesis Blue. And while this sequence in Emesis Blue, following Medic's escape from the funeral, is in fact after Spy's Disguise, Medic showing up in Spy's Disguise takes place after Medic's time at Conagher Slaughterhouse in Emesis Blue, the main meat of the movie, after he receives a cross necklace in the church amidst his fight with the Butcher. This makes sense, even though you likely missed it on your first watch, or were perhaps confused by it, as we see Medic swap outfits from his funeral clothing back into his uniform, now with an additional cross necklace, indicating that it is probably a time skip to some degree. Furthermore, we hear the Conagher twins in the slaughterhouse receiving a phone call stating that their other brother, Dell, passed away in Dust Bowl after the entire area was destroyed.
Hey, Dell, you haven't called me in a while. How's Dust Bowl working out, brother? Gone? You heard me. There's nothing listening. I swear to God, if anything happens to my brother, I'm gonna... Shut up and listen to me. Forget the test subjects. I think we've been compromised. You're so goddamn inconsiderate. Shut up!
Assuming that the phone call was made at a time not long after the decimation of Dust Bowl, we can assume that at least the end portion of Spy's Disguise took place almost alongside the events of Emesis Blue, the only caveat being that the respawn machine being broken in Spy's Disguise must have happened before the events of Emesis Blue to trigger the respawn defects, though it's also likely that these are two different respawn machines entirely. In any case, the prequel was dismissed for the most part as having not much lore significance, so I won't want to lose you already with spawn machines being destroyed. So let's go through a very brief rundown of the Emesis Blue prequel, going over all the unexplored details that tie into Emesis Blue and the upcoming Murder Inc. before we theorize even more, as just from these two parts of the timeline having more clarity, there's already so much we can draw from this regarding Murder Inc. that we'll get into afterwards. In the intro, we see Blue spy and engineer infiltrating a red desert base, presumably Dust Bowl. In Chapter 1, Spy infiltrates the first line of defense in Red's base, assassinating an engineer and assuming his identity, disguising as him. This attempt at going undercover is soon proven to be futile, however, as he's caught out by a Red spy. This is the main premise of the short, and a slight peek into its undertones and what was later explored in Emesis Blue, the existential dread, frustration, and repetition of living for eternity when respawning, in this case through the form of Spy getting increasingly uneasy, troubled, and exasperated as he continuously fails to infiltrate the Red base after numerous disguised attempts, yet being forced to try over and over to no avail due to constantly respawning after death. This is where one of the first details with a broad but surely intentional meaning is introduced. Posters that read, "Keep an eye on the spy." At first glance, it looks like any other funny TF2 poster, merging a common gameplay sentiment of spy checking with a parody of a real-world World War II era loose lips sink ships or someone talked propaganda posters, which were meant to warn soldiers about spies and leaks, similar to other real-world posters with references to historical events that we see within the TF2 engine. Valve even hosted a competition during the Love and War update for TF2 players to create their own propaganda posters to advocate for either soldier or demo to win votes for specialized items of one of the classes in a future update. So why did the creator intentionally choose to create his own bespoke texture for this? It could mean that what this poster is referencing has ties to the Emesis Blue universe, although what it is likely referencing doesn't compare to how interesting the later things we will cover are. It provides extra threads that connect all of the installations together though, so let's get this corniest one out of the way first. In the context of Emesis Blue, the base meaning of loose lips sink ships transforms that historical vigilance into a source of dread, being unable to speak about the horrors that are being hidden. This is echoed in Soldier not being allowed to speak about the terrors of what he witnessed at Conagher Slaughterhouse due to the CIA giving him a script to stick to at the funeral, and the spy backing up this incorrect story. The actual poster design shares glaring similarities to Wolfenstein New Order and Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus, released on the same year as Spy's Disguise. In both games, the soldiers, which look remarkably similar to the one on this poster, are often literally hollowed out, transformed into cyborgs or super soldats through the gruesome medical experiments of General Death's Head. They're no longer men and are just property of the state. This not only foreshadows Spy's fate in the prequel, merging himself with Machine, but builds upon key notions in Emesis Blue of breaches of human rights of death row prisoners being treated as living weapons and commodities by a corrupt ruling class, with the elite essentially owning people. Furthermore, soldiers being dehumanized and being owned is complemented with insinuations of hell and devilish involvement with the respawn machine in Emesis Blue, which is also touched upon in these Wolfenstein games. I've never actually played Wolfenstein, so bear with me with this.
That you should. Tell me, what is it?
According to the Wolfenstein wiki, the Dar al-Yehud is a fictional ancient Jewish-based mystical secret society in the game that has designed and created inventions using ancient Sumerian technology centuries ahead of contemporary times. Their practices are based on pure reason and are described as a way of understanding God through knowledge and natural law rather than, according to Seth Roth, the creator, supernatural bupkis. Their creations were nothing more than a method of communing with God. As such, they were never intended to be used, no matter how powerful they were. In Wolfenstein, the Nazis found the secret methods to creating these dangerous inventions and used them for weaponry, perverting their sacred work in order to win World War II. This could allude to the fact that the origin of the TF2 respawn machine could in fact have an ancient, pure, and faithful intention intertwined with God, yet was corrupted for misuse by modern elites such as Archibald. Furthermore, communion with God is thought to take place through dreams and enhanced by hallucinogenic drugs. Themes we see explored in Emesis Blue, where taking pharmaceutical drugs with hallucinogenic effects are actually connecting people with potentially otherworldly beings. For example, could the Plague Doctor be some type of god? These themes weren't explored much in Spy's Disguise. As the series approaches potential resolution with Murder Inc., could we see a more religious integration down the line? Was this the reason Medic began to wear a cross around his neck after seeing the terrors that the respawn machine is capable of? This seems pretty broad and just a little reference, but this broadness in themes will tighten throughout this video that will put focus into a more clear picture of what Murder Inc. is likely to be. During Spy's repeated failed attempts at infiltrating Red Base, at one inexplicably coincidental moment, Spy throws away his disguise kit in a fit of rage. Yet a sentry bullet collides with it mid-air, causing a reaction that disrupts the sapper's intended standard functions, and in turn, implemented an additional ability, an option to also disguise as an enemy turret, as well as the 9 mercenaries, fully transforming his flesh into a machine temporarily. This grants him the prowess to remain disguised for longer without being caught, taking out more of the red team, and after enough practice and familiarity with this technology, he eventually gains the ability to disguise as dispensers and teleporters too. The anguish of being subjected to a loop of being killed and respawning transfers from the Spy to the Red Engineer in this moment, as Engineer begins to lose his mind after being tortured by the repeated, more successful ambush attempts from Spy. In fact, Spy's domination is so disruptive at this point that the whole of Red Team group up to hatch a plan to hunt down the Spy specifically. After the meeting ends and the rest of Red Team has left, Engineer opens the supply locker, peering at his toolbox, as if whatever lies within it holds a power that it shouldn't. A power that only he himself knows about. We also see a note on the side of the door, signed by S and E, what I assume is our blue spy and Engineer. The note details a challenge to some kind of duel, taunting Engineer, stating that they don't intend to respawn again, hinting that it will be their final battle, taking the Red Engineer out once and for all. Engineer takes that last part to heart though, and in the most extreme way possible, as in the next scene, he approaches the respawn machine, and despite a glaring sign warning "Do not disable," Engineer destroys the entire machine, setting off a massive emergency alarm. This means that from this point, death is once again permanent. If you die, you're gone forever. No respawning, no second attempts. Life is precious once again, but as you'll see, this does not change the spirit of war between Red and Blue Team. But before we go further, there's already some things that are easily missed in this sequence. The most basic is that the security cameras appear to be owned by a tech company called Helix. This is the same company that appears in the same capacity in Conagher Slaughterhouse, insinuating a deep-rooted integration in the Badlands and Gravel Wars overall, not just within the corrupt Slaughterhouse and equally corrupt connections with Archibald. In the same vein, why is it that Engineer has the knowledge of the respawn machine in this manner, let alone access to it? Surely the creators, similarly to the administrator with Australium, want this under wraps as much as possible from Redman and Bluetalk, let alone the mercenaries.
So what if I made a deal with the old man's brother? The war is their business, and mine is to drag it out for as long as humanly possible.
This is likely pointing out further that the Conagher brothers have some kind of special treatment over the other mercenaries. Not only do the twins have their own dedicated slaughterhouse in Two Fort, but this brother, Del, seemingly also has knowledge with the respawn machine itself. Were they involved in the creation of it? After all, it was Del's grandfather who invented the technology to utilize Australium for eternal life in the canon comics. We still need more information, which we'll go into in this video, to bring this full circle together, but this is solidified a little bit more in the Murder Inc. trailer, where Jimmy, the scout detective, is seen near a Texas flag, the birthplace of the Conagher brothers, insinuating that at least part of Jimmy's objective, which we'll cover, involves following some of the Conagher heritage or family roots. On top of that, if we return to the shot of the supply closet, we get a peek at 3 VHS tapes. One is blank, one says Emesis Blue, and one says Smoking Gun. VHS tapes have been proved significant to the plot in Emesis Blue, but what are these trying to tell us in Spy's Disguise, and how do these link up? For starters, the Emesis Blue tape pretty much confirms that the plot of at least Emesis Blue, if not the whole series, is pre-planned, even if loosely. But the fact it's on a VHS tape in the world, well, perhaps experimentation of Emesis diazepam was already being experimented on in this stage, possibly similarly to how Dad Yehud used medication to connect to God, or to try and sedate the mercenaries so that they'll be futile if they want an uprising, trying to escape the infinite respawn cycle. But Smoking Gun? What does this insinuate? As far as I know, there isn't any exact media piece with this title that Chad Payne could have been referencing. The phrase itself, however, is a fairly common idiom for undisputable, conclusive evidence that confirms a fact or a crime, essentially representing the exact moment that a mystery is solved and the perpetrator is exposed. Thus, the implied imagery of a gun still smoking from a shot being fired, essentially being caught red-handed. In tape form, this could mean that there is some kind of blackmail within a tape, for example, evidence of wrongdoing being documented potentially tied to the Emesis tape. Evidence that is a surefire way to get a perpetrator locked away forever. Though since almost all of the other tapes are to point towards themes or narrative points, we can assume that its contents might have some answers that fans of the franchise are desperately looking for, since Emesis Blue's complex, disorienting and disjointed narrative feels so cryptic and confusing that the film feels like an investigation with no clear smoking gun moment. This is where the pieces start coming together. Almost all of the tapes we see in Spy's Disguise and Emesis Blue have links to direct parts of the story, or thematic comparisons with a clear inspiration. And with the inclusion of Emesis Blue tape in this prequel, we can assume, like I said, that the narrative has been pre-planned the whole time within reason, suggesting that all tapes, details, and Easter eggs are intentional. Everything is added for a reason. In this vein, any tapes that don't seem to currently line up in Spy's Disguise, especially ones we see later, seem to be clarified within Emesis Blue, and those that remain unsold even after Emesis Blue, the ones that feel currently unanswered, are likely to be keys and hints towards the third installment, Murder Inc. This train of thought points to Murder Inc. essentially being the smoking gun of the series, the installment wrapping up all loose ends of the plot, hinting at the finality of a definitive, violent, final act. Not convinced yet? Well, it just so happens that the name Murder Inc. is actually traditionally associated with a real-world, powerful organized crime syndicate specializing in contract killing. Of course, exactly what we see in the Murder Inc. trailer, and pair this with the smoking gun theory, and the tape is likely symbolic of the elusive mystery that Emesis Blue holds, and a syndicate of organized crime potentially led or aided by Jimmy the Hitman, and potentially even Miss Pauling, to discover the true answers through a crime-driven investigation. The trailer, theming, and title points to a narrative more driven by clues, crimes, and the pursuit of conclusive proof, which definitely contrasts with Emesis Blue's more cerebral and memory-bending psychological horror. Murder Inc. really could be that satisfying smoking gun moment, but we still need some more answers. We see more posters of notoriety spread around the Badlands at this point, definitely pointing towards the midterm effects of Spy's newfound gargantuan power, also hammering down that the creator really didn't actually want the viewers to miss this. We also get another example of significance being drawn to Engineer's toolbox once again, before we see more action sequences of Spy disguising his buildings, essentially ambushing the whole of Red Team completely solo and getting away with it. Again, this is in a pretty wacky, stereotypical SFM manner. During the action, Blue Engineer appears helping Spy as a duo, as proposed in the note hanging in Engineer's locker, eventually leading to them both taking out pretty much all of the Red Team aside from Red Engineer, who is protecting his toolbox like his life depends on it. And remember, in this case, it really likely does, because if he were to die here now, he would be dead forever without a functioning respawn machine. During a brawl, Red Engineer lands a shot on Blue Engineer, hitting him in the chest, and though Spy had a method to heal him with his new abilities, Red Engineer attaches a sapper to his machinery, pulsing an electrical current through his very being, giving Engineer an opportunity to finally unveil what secret he'd been keeping in his toolbox. An entire, feature-packed, armored, bulletproof mech suit. A couple of seconds after this unveiling, we get a small Easter egg, showing characters from the official end of the line shot. This could obviously just be a simple Easter egg, however, there is a small tiny chance that it's a confirmation that Emesis Blue occurs in the end of the line canon TF2 timeline. Regardless, without the help of Blue Spy, the Red Engineer manages to finally eliminate the Blue Engineer. Overall, not much substance connecting the dots for Emesis Blue and Murder Inc. are in this chapter. Chapter 4 follows the huge, intense spectacle of a brawl between Blue Sniper and Red Engineer, resulting in Spy almost killing Engineer by sawing him apart with a buzzsaw, but a piece of rubble gets propelled by it at the last second, knocking Spy out. And that brings us to the final chapter. The final chapter is where we get most of the clues about Murder Inc. and where most of the Emesis Blue cohesiveness is revealed. Hello, it's me, the medic from the What Shows Emesis Blue thumbnail. This message is sponsored by Raycon. Thank God the weather's getting better. I'm all good with getting cozy inside, honing my talents and working on my magnum opus. But life just isn't the same without spending nice time outdoors. Whether you're training, connecting to nature, or just want some fresh air, Raycon's essential open earbuds have become my go-to for listening to music on the go. Because they're open ear, you can listen to music or podcasts while still hearing what's happening around you. You can still feel out one with the world and still talk to the friends at the gym without doing the huh move. Huh? What did you say? What did you say? What did you say? None of that. None of that. These are over ear. The sound stays clear and balanced. You don't just completely dissociate from your surroundings. One of the lights went off. I've just gone into Emesis Blue mode. And right now you can get them for 20% off. And even if you don't like them, they have a 30-day guarantee. With the lightweight and the rotating ear hooks, they actually stay in comfortably while active and don't fall out. I wear them whenever I'm out of the house or doing activities that these big clunky editing headphones aren't the best for. Those have the balanced sound for editing, which means less bass. But these Raycon Essential earbuds have different EQ settings that can add more more bass and switch it up to give a different and refreshing tailored listening experience, lasting up to 36 hours with this charging case. These genuinely have the best bass I've ever heard on open-ear earbuds. I don't know how they do it even though it's not fully inside your ear. The Essential open earbuds are perfect for refreshing your routine this spring. Go to the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/OrisTVOpen to get 20% off. Thanks Raycon for sponsoring. Buying a pair of these is a great way to help me out if you do enjoy the videos, and remember, 30-day guarantee and 20% off on my link. Now, let's get back to Emesis Pharmaceuticals. It starts with the blue engineer who was killed, revealing that he didn't actually die and was using a dead ringer, driving to save Blue Spy from the red engineer at the last second. The might of red engineer's technology is too much, despite taking a battering from Spy, returning also with one red eye and one blue eye. A very familiar visual that appears repeatedly in Emesis Blue. In another duel, Spy manages to finally crush the engineer, melting his equipment into his flesh in a fury of flames before passing out. This is where the psychological torment that we know all too well from Emesis Blue starts to creep in. Spy awakens in a blue and black void to discover an uncanny robot version of himself peering over him, almost as if that is what he could eventually become if he surrendered to the fate of blending with machine. Spy reaches out to touch the robot duplicate, but just as they're about to touch, Blue Spy gets scared and quickly arms himself with one of his turret arms, shooting at his mimic and sending him into another episode of unconsciousness. This, of course, has parallels to Medic's experiences in Emesis Blue, representing a fractured identity and unstable sense of self, both tied to having to respawn too frequently, and in this case, due to losing humanity through losing organic flesh as the body to a cyborg machine vessel, which appears a little different to the Medic's, which seems to be fueled at least partially by guilt on top of the respawn machine's side effects. After regaining consciousness again, Spy finds himself in a hospital bed next to a TV playing static. Beside it, a stack of VHS tapes. This is another major set of clues to work out if more of the blind spots in the references pair up to the potential plot of Murder Inc., providing way more than what has currently been revealed up until this point. Remember, with these VHSs, if they don't correlate to either the prequel or Emesis Blue, there's a high chance that they'll correlate to something in Murder Inc. So what VHS tapes are relevant to Murder Inc. or give us more insight into understanding Emesis Blue? Let's quickly go through them one by one and try to decode them. You might think that these are a bit far-fetched and pedantic, but if you bear with me, the full circle that this comes in and how these things link together is pretty insane. Czarface is a hip-hop collective started in 2016, composed of Inspector Deck, 7L, and Esoteric, gaining more popularity through collaborations with MF Doom. The relevance is that their music videos are well known for including comic book superhero-like personas and elaborate villain-like alter egos. A 2015 song, Good Villains Go Last, explores a direct exploration of superhuman abilities and savagery, set against the backdrop of Czarface facing off with Ghostface Killer Villain. This includes lines such as
I reach quota, black ops, elite soldier,
and
machine gun rap, clap until the beat's over.
Obviously fitting to the mechanical soldier Spy becomes in the prequel, especially taking note of Czarface's metallic exoskeleton exterior. But you might not be convinced, thinking that this was just a reference to something cool that Chad Payne enjoys. That's entirely possible, of course, but bear with me here.
My past is darker than the blackest magic marker in the hands of Clive Barker when he's cracking books of blood.
Clive Barker being a prominent horror author, most notably having his books adapted into Hellraiser and Candyman. Hellraiser coming from his story, A Book of Blood, which features turning a living medium into a living record of horror tales and painful stories of the dead, with messages being inscribed on their skin, communicating their terror to the real world. I can't ignore that there's some overlap with Emesis Blue here, where the Jaunts and other monsters' tampered bodies act as a narrative device to help us understand the horrors of the respawn machine, communicating that through their contorted bodies, as well as Scout's stitches and many of the Merc's physical and mental manifestations of their turmoil. This could have been an initial, more on-the-nose exploration of this theme that Chad Payne wanted to explore more in Emesis Blue originally. At the very least, it's a nod to alter egos and violence, and how a gain of power often leads to corruption and excess harm. and how people can often gain an ego and use a purpose to justify over-the-top actions summated in the sentiment stated in the album's title, "Every hero needs a villain," insinuating that the only way to justify some actions, such as despise carnage, is for there to be a worthy villain to go up against. This could also extend to Murder Inc., as we see Jimmy the Hitman killing multiple victims in gruesome ways, supposedly for a greater cause such as what we discussed regarding the takedown of the corrupt corporate giants like Archibald's Empire, Helix Technologies, and Emesis Pharmaceuticals. Yet how much Jimmy and the trailer itself appears to be glamorizing that process suggests that they almost revel in the violent actions themselves, as did Spy, to suggest that they may also just be finding a reason to act out this violence, and the purpose of doing so may not even be the main motivator. Regardless of how much of this you believe, I assume you agree that it at least partially inspired, even if indirectly, Spy's disguise, considering its deliberate inclusion, meaning that its relevance is at least justified in existing, even if you believe it only to be tied to Spy's disguise and not the other two movies. And don't worry, that's probably the most far-fetched one out there, it just happened to be first on the top of VHS tapes. The next tape on the shelf was Emesis Blue, which tells me that Chad Payne really wanted to hammer home its presence in this short. Something he really didn't want the audience to miss, indicating that the tapes are relevant. But within the actual story, not just the messages from the creator, why would the tape be in this hospital room? Is it just commonplace for dealing with Respawn side effects at this point? Almost as an instruction video? Or does whoever is in charge of this ward, probably Medic, have some involvement in Emesis Blue or the Respawn machine himself, hence his overwhelming guilt in Emesis Blue? The third tape simply reads Brighton Rock Live. Brighton Rock is most famously a 1938 novel by Graham Greene, later adapted into a classic noir film. It's a dark, gritty story about the criminal underworld, gang warfare, and a deeply flawed sociopathic young mobster named Pinky Brown.
You can call me Pinky if you like. That's what my friends call me.
It explores the struggle between good and evil, symbolized by the unchanging nature of a seaside rock of candy, saying that people and humanity just doesn't change. That does seem to line up exactly with the sentiment of every hero needs a villain, and the ties with Hitman Jimmy's actions in the murders in the trailer that we discussed, really cementing that the reference to a foundational piece of British mobster media is highly deliberate on Chad Payne's part, and that the themes of gang violence, moral decay, and psychological burden of organized crime that we see in Brighton Rock definitely seems too close to be a coincidence when it comes to the probable themes of Murder Inc.
You believe, don't you? You think it's true?
Of course it's true. These atheists don't know nothing. Of course there's hell, flames, damnations, torments.
Religious themes are also considered in Brighton Rock, which become more apparent towards the end of Emesis Blue, and the prequel where Medic has a Catholic necklace. Furthermore, the very next tape along simply reads the number 3. I mean, sure, skeptics will say that this is a joke about Valve not releasing a third game in their series, or perhaps it's just a backwards E for Emesis Blue. But considering how deliberate most of the tapes can comfortably be identified as, I myself don't have much struggle in believing it's to suggest that this is teasing 3 installments in the series. The first 3 tapes literally correlate to each movie in the series, Czarface being a parallel to Spy's disguise, the second literally saying Emesis Blue, and the third being about gang violence, young mobsters, and organized crime. Right before the next tape says 3. And remember what we explored about Murder Inc. likely being the smoking gun finale and tie-in moment of resolution? Not only does that hammer home that Murder Inc. is the final act, but the metaphorical nail in this idiom gets hammered in further when the 5th and final tape in the pile is also a repeated one, none other than Smoking Gun. This gives us a great foundation for what Murder Inc. will cover, aside from the obvious of it being about a hitman, which we will still dig deeper into in this video. But what is the live part of the Brighton Rock tape? Brighton Rock Live pulls us away from the noir film, as there are multiple videos with the exact Brighton Rock Live title on YouTube, but they're showcasing a performance of the song titled with the same name by the rock band Queen. With so many noir films referenced by Chad Payne in Emesis Blue, I assume that was the main reference here, especially with how applicable the Hitman Mafia themes are to the Murder Inc. trailer. But if you grant a little bit more open-mindedness, you might just be blown away. The very top YouTube result when you type in Brighton Rock Live onto YouTube shows a live performance of the song performed at no other place than Houston, Texas. And if you want to get really crazy with it, the video is dated as 1977, just under 10 years later from the night that Emesis Blue took place on 1968. And the lyrics? Well, imagine they somehow tied to Murder Inc. absolutely. Like, would you believe what I'm saying if the name Jimmy was a focus of the song, for example? Well, except, wait, that isn't just an example, it's just the truth. That's right, a character named Jimmy is the main focus of the song, the same name that the Murder Inc. hitman is called on the wiki. Furthermore, the song themes are ones of temptation, guilt, and the fear of being discovered regarding two lovers. I initially wasn't sure if Miss Pauling was aiding Scout's endeavors in the Murder Inc. Snapshots trailer, or taking photos of the crime scene to hunt him down himself. But if this isn't the biggest coincidence ever, it's likely indicative of Scout and Miss Pauling having a romantic relationship in the upcoming film, especially as she seemingly disposes of some evidence which would aid Jimmy. Maybe she's protecting him. Also alluding to the themes of fearing being discovered, as their relationship is likely one that bridges a harsh gap between organized crime and the authorities. And before we finish this segment, it's worth saying that this song's influence is probably why Chad Payne included so many seemingly random rock guitars in the prequel. He must have been having a massive Queen phase or something. I also tried to see if the performance bared any resemblance to the flicker that appears in the first Murder Inc. teaser because of the abstract shapes, but it seemed way too much for a stretch, and that would have been pretty pointless anyway. The only tape from this stack which we haven't covered yet simply reads, "What is Toast?" Some speculate that What is Toast could be another teased upcoming installment. However, I think it could be a reference to a Margaret Atwood book called Oryx and Crake, where a survivor of a biological apocalypse tries to explain the concept of bread and toast to genetically engineered humans who are so artificial, naive, and inhuman that they can't comprehend the idea of toast, and in their language, it literally can't be described to them because of how extinct and irrelevant humans have become, essentially. This, of course, perfectly aligns with the fear of loss of humanity we see in Spy's Disguise, with a gradual cyborg-like takeover of the body, and in Emesis Blue with rampant cloning and fractured personalities due to respawning, and the subhuman jaunts that are created due to respawn defects. In fact, although pretty standard for creatures like this in media, both the Crake and jaunts have glowing eyes. I wonder if this dystopian theme is explored further in Murder Inc. If it is 10 years later, perhaps the world is more apocalyptic than the trailer lets on. Because, and you're not going to believe this, because I can't quite believe it either, but the main character in Oryx and Crake is called Jimmy. What the fuck? Like, seriously, I mean, what are the chances that all of these pieces of entertainment all share similar themes that perfectly line up with Murder Inc., let alone them having the protagonist with their exact same name? In Oryx and Crake, the Snowman, someone formerly known as Jimmy, believes that he is the last human after a manufactured pandemic wipes out civilization. And how are these clones made, you might ask? Through a plague engineered by a pharmaceutical pill, replacing humanity with a docile disposition called Crakers. In the book, Jimmy protects the innocent, genetically engineered humans who consider him a guardian. This is a setup that would pair extremely well with the Murder Inc. mobster sentiment of dismantling a corrupt elite establishment to protect an exploited class. Furthermore, it might give us more insight into more themes that may be covered in Murder Inc., and even potential spoilers. Not only does this book feature a love interest, Oryx, who the bioengineered humans also look up to, a perfect fit for Miss Pauling's potential character as an accomplice and love interest, but spoiler, the counterpart lady in Oryx and Crake is actually killed by the person who created the insidious pharmaceutical, leaving Jimmy all alone as the last human on Earth. Who could the traitor character be in the Emesis Blue universe? Another detail and narrative we might see in Murder Inc. as a parallel is an origin story for Jimmy, as in Oryx and Crake, his upbringing is detailed as being a high-tech, corporate, controlled one, in a compound alienated from his scientist parents. This could mean that Jimmy could be a patient X for the cloning process, one of the death row patients that were hired by Emesis or the Archibald Foundation as a test subject for the respawn machine. He could be the original Scout. Or equally, somehow he was born into this mess and his parents were higher ups at any of these giant corporations. Another reference to Emesis Blue appears in other, now hidden and unlisted animations that Fortress Films have made. While exploring these unlisted videos, I stumbled upon a video titled Medic, a Team Fortress 2 musical. It gives a great insight into how Chad Payne developed his idea of the Emesis Blue medic becoming insane over time, in another adaptation of a similar idea. So if you're interested about this creative process, or even potentially more backstory for the medic in Emesis Blue, or at least an imagined character who is very similar to him,
I'm a physician on a mission and contrition's not my style. Am I a monster or a man? I cannot say. Let them die. Leave said demo man for dead. Let's have you filled with lead. I'm eating venom, reading or excreting on said John. There's no hiding from the screaming in my mind. The medic will just laugh as the heavy is torn in half by the medic and his bones are gruesome blade.
Definitely check that out. I'll put a link in the description. Now, those VHS tapes provided a huge yet incredibly informative tangent, so let's quickly finish off the recap of Spy's Disguise before we tie down some of the final pieces of evidence and theories for Murder Inc. Finally. In the hospital, Spy sees Red Engineer looking down at him behind bulletproof glass, but ends up being a hallucination. This hallucination haunts him for the rest of the short, in a similar vein to Medic and the Plague Doctor. Spy is seen to have a gash on his head, assumedly from where he hit his head during the buzzsaw bite of 68. Though there actually isn't the same gash on his head right after he hits his head. I'll chalk this up to a mistake in the animation rather than a theory, but I could say that both Spy and Scout end up with scars on their head after being treated by the medic, which could say there is more medic foul play we don't know about, which is actually backed up a little bit by the tendencies outlined in the Medic musical video I spoke about, and the guilt that Medic's riddled with. But to be honest, I think that it's more likely just an animation mistake, leaving out the head gash to begin with, than this grand secret explanation. As you can probably assume by how much I've mentioned him at this point, the medic does appear in the hospital room soon after this, bearing the cross necklace over his lab coat that he picked up in the Emesis Blue fight scene with the Butcher. He puts a yellow, unlabeled VHS tape into the player that shows Spy uncontrollably turning into various parts of machinery, also revealing a flash of the android Spy. Spy continues to hallucinate again as his eyes swap between red and blue. Is he realizing, or doesn't know, what team he is, and understands that the Gravel Wars is a lie? Or is he no longer human, no longer knowing who he really is in an identity crisis? Is there an infernal, hellish influence? Does disguising take the essence of other mercenaries? And as such, has he taken the essence of machinery itself by disguising as it? Regardless, the insecure identity and sense of self is obviously echoed with Medic's similar troubles in Emesis Blue. To be honest, this eye color change seems too vague and abstract to have any detailed theories on. Spy is then taken away by the medic in an ambulance, assumedly to take him home or for further medical aid, seeing a hallucination of Engineer for the last time that we see. This ending is likely the point that ties back into the ending of Emesis Blue, with Medic in the same outfit, unless of course Medic was hallucinating Spy being in the back of the ambulance himself in Emesis Blue, which is entirely possible. Speaking of hallucinations though, one last throwaway suggestion is with that final sighting of the Engineer hallucination. In canon TF2, Engineer doesn't smoke. Aside from multi-class hats even, sure, SFM changes things all the time. Even in this very short, we see Blue Engineer wielding a dead ringer, which isn't possible in game. But I can't help but make the outlandishly silly suggestion that the Engineer isn't actually a hallucination. And he isn't even the Engineer. Maybe, just maybe, he's smoking because the Spy is actually disguised as the Red Engineer, and his disappearance is simply a standard Spy cloaking device. In turn, Red Engineer was put inside of Spy's body. I have no motive to justify this, but it would also coincidentally explain why the gash on Spy's head wasn't apparent immediately, as maybe Medic performed this transfer. In any case, that is where the Spy's Disguise short film ends. So with the tapes in Spy's Disguise, we can link each to different themes that correlate with the prequel, Emesis Blue, and Murder Inc. Now all that is left is to take a look at the Murder Inc. trailers themselves to get extra insight into where all this fits in, and also take a look at the videotapes in Emesis Blue to see if there are any other missing gaps that could be answered with the newfound themes that are very likely to be in Murder Inc. Let's take a look at these tapes first with the help of the Watch Show's analysis before we take a direct, educated look at the Murder Inc. teasers. Of course, these VHS tapes that we're about to talk about come straight from Emesis Blue, and if you want a deeper look at that, be sure to check out the Watch Show's full video. And while I'm at it, if you're curious about the other monsters in Emesis Blue, their abilities, lore, origins, weaknesses, and designs, check out my last video showcasing every TFC horror monster in this way, with a 25-minute segment just dedicated to Emesis Blue monsters specifically. The King in Yellow is a story that details a play that when read makes readers go mad, an information hazard. This of course links to Emesis Blue with blinding knowledge of the universe in respawn machines and the respawn core, alongside the dread of infinite time and nothingness driving people insane. The King in Yellow also details something called a pallid mask, which is used in the stories to symbolize corruption, lost identities, and the intrusions of the supernatural into reality. Definitely generally Emesis Blue themed of course, but also a great representation of how the detective spy ends up by the end of the film, after becoming corrupt and corroborating with the fake CIA story about what happened, highlighting Spy's loss of his original self through corruption and experiencing the supernatural. Spy plays the persona of a private detective to hide his true nature of a ruthless corporate hitman. This tape is definitely prominently tied to Emesis Blue. The movie Faust details a cautionary tale of greed and moral decay. Both adaptations cover the legend of a disillusioned scholar who sells his soul to the devil for worldly pleasures, knowledge, and power. This of course ties into Emesis Blue, with the respawn machines alluded to being an infernal hellish contraption. The ending of Faust, however, spoiler alert, heavily promotes how there is an ultimate victory of love and divine grace over evil. Depending on how much influence Chad Payne took from this ending could mirror itself in events that unfold in Murder Inc. It could mean that Murder Inc. has a good ending where love wins overall. This 1920 horror film documents an absurd tale of a sleepwalking murderer through silent film, with a disfigured face that definitely resembles some of the retextured, essentially makeup style used on Medic's face in Emesis Blue. This of course points to Medic really being the true killer behind the murders in Emesis Blue, just doing so in his sleep, as well as explaining the harsh silhouettes and angular lighting used in the movie. I haven't seen Cabinet of Dr. Caligari yet, but I haven't grasped anything that suggests any unfolding in Murder Inc. and is likely just an inspiration behind Emesis Blue's narrative and art direction. A similar result was found in this film, which details a smile being carved into a child's face and following that child's life as a disfigured person in society, which could have also inspired elements in this famous Emesis Blue shot. This story also inspired the Joker character, which the creator has an Unlisted SFM parody animation about. In fact, he has two. Again, this just seems to tie to Emesis Blue and the kind of inspiration and art direction. Not much yet that gives us anything new and interesting about Murder Inc. The Invisible Man is a classic example of a character experiencing total loss of identity and its connected morality that comes from hiding your true self. A scientist discovers a method to grant invisibility, yet after applying it to himself, finds out that it can't be reversed. In losing his idea of himself and realizing that he can no longer be caught or held accountable for his actions, his moral compass quickly fades. His godlike powers isolates him from others and detaches him from his humanity, driving him further into violence and a megalomaniacal rampage. This sentiment serves as a psychological blueprint for many characters in each installation of Emesis Blue. In Spy's Disguise, we see this as a catalyst, where Spy's newfound mechanical abilities act as a technological hubris that mirrors the Invisible Man, where Spy reigns terror against all of his opponents to a horrific degree, even if the overall tone is lighthearted. In Emesis Blue, we see the themes once again consuming those with technological power, those who own the respawn machine, with greed being at the forefront of their minds, at the expense of others. I'm curious if or how this could manifest in Murder Inc. If it is true that almost all of original humanity will have been erased and replaced by respawn clones, I wonder if a lack of identity is what is fueling a dystopian crime-riddled future, as levels of identity in the general population fall to a record low as everyone is aware of their synthetic origin and lack of original self. I mean, even externally, everyone will look like the same 9 people. It's a stretch, but I think it could be a cool idea, and, you know, potentially it's true. A famous main focus of the Metropolis film is the lower class revolting against a rich elite. A mad scientist creates a robotic clone, the false Mariah, to impersonate a leader, sow chaos and destroy the working class. Could there be someone high up in the Emesis Blue universe that is just a clone to distract the working class? Is it Archibald? The mercenaries are the workers dying endlessly in the dirt, while Jules Archibald and his colleagues are the elite profiting off of their eternal labor via the respawn machine. Or at least, whoever is gaining from these wars. Helix Technology, Emesis Pharmaceuticals, and any other organizations like munition companies, for example. In Emesis Blue's case, or I should say Murder Inc.'s case, the false, what's it called? The false fucking cunt? The false Mariah is likely John F. Kennedy. And this will explain itself if you watch the end of this video. I don't want to ruin some stuff that's coming up, but yeah. Just remember for the future of the video, JFK could just be a distraction from the respawn machines. Another Emesis Blue parallel is that Emesis diazepam pills are used to keep the clones docile and unaware of their looping, nightmarish reality, a way to distract that class of people. This tape, Metropolis, is one that seems to branch out of just Emesis Blue in relevance across all 3 films. There is of course the idea of creating a robotic self and a distinguished line between human and machine with the false Mariah and exploration of technology, which is echoed in Spy's Disguise. And although JFK could be a false Mariah figure in Murder Inc., another angle is that we've already explored the possibility of there being a lower class revolting against a higher class. The events of this happening in Metropolis could be foreshadowing events that will unfold in Murder Inc., though unlike the brighter ending of Faust, the revolt in Metropolis is proven to be disastrous. The lower class that is revolting manages to destroy a heart machine, in this case likely the respawn machine, yet this causes a ripple effect that floods their underground homes and puts their children in danger, as this was an intentional rebellion programmed by a villainous robot as a distraction rather than a natural uprising, aimed at improving civilians' lives. This exact dynamic doesn't have an exact parallel in Emesis Blue, so we can't use it to predict what could happen, but the revolt against the ruling class definitely has ties to what is very likely to occur in Murder Inc. That same uncertainty can't be said for the next tape, the movie M, which is about a band of criminals catching a child murderer. Right off the bat, a band of criminals coming together to catch a bigger one? That's exactly what Murder Inc. seems to be about. Like we discussed, Murder Inc. is actually a real name of an assassination wing of the American Mafia from the 1930s. And from the teaser trailer, it's safe to assume that the next installation will at least partially shift away from the supernatural horror and move into a more gritty, noir-driven, organized crime hunt. This is actually great to hear because one of the main criticisms of Emesis Blue was the sheer amount of references that many thought had not much meaning aside from pointing to inspirations, particularly in a way that is injecting certain imagery in an almost egotistical way to make the movie seem smarter than it is, or to self-gratify knowledge of cinema history without actually providing much extra takeaway for the viewers to experience. I do think there's truth to that, even if providing inspirations is a good way for people who are inspired to follow artistic pathways and understand messages more themselves. It can just come across as self-serving rather than making the film actually better. I think that the M iconography is the best example of this in the movie, as it doesn't provide much within the actual narrative. That would not be the case, however, if this was built upon in Murder Inc., which does look likely. Of course, criminals banding together lines up, so if this is explored, especially with moments in M being included in a way that ties Emesis Blue and the M symbolism in it closer to Murder Inc., then in my opinion, it can redeem itself. In fact, if the M iconography was just included in Emesis Blue to tease the focus of Murder Inc., then it's almost good enough for me at least. Similarly to how in M, criminals hunt down a child murderer, criminals, like outlined earlier regarding Scout's potential takedown and deconstruction of organizations that are the true owners of the respawn machines, Murder Inc. will likely feature the surviving factions of the underworld, an accumulation of previous victims and remnants of surviving mercenaries that we know from the Emesis Blue universe, coming together, possibly with the aid of Miss Pauling or against her to act as the judge, jury, and executioner of those who have been psychologically and physically tormented by the Respawn machine and Emesis Pharmaceuticals. If the Respawn machine does get shut down, death is permanent again. Similarly to In Spy's Disguise, an amazing setup for at least part of Murder Inc., or I know it's too early to even think about, but potential installations after Murder Inc. The vigilantes will have to clean up the mess left behind by the corporate elites. If themes of the false Mariah, such as JFK or whoever it might be, does appear in Murder Inc., plot points of layers of who to trust and who is being paid off by the elite, and who is best to team up with to take down the corporations, Respawn Machine, or whoever made the deal with Archibald and the higher-ups for Respawn Machine to be possible, likely a devil as we mentioned, will be covered. Something that will create an incredible tone and atmosphere full of paranoia and people trying to decipher others' intentions and genuine humanity. With incredibly high stakes among prevalent themes of a ruling class owning tech amongst a climatic uprising against corruption, still with the incredibly high possibility of more explicitly obvious and exposed hellish, satanic, religious, psychological horror and thriller themes, and expressionist portrayal of inner turmoil. Like we discussed, Emesis Blue gets quite a bit of criticism for having too many references that are obtrusive and in roundabout ways to explore the lore. While there's truth to this, and perhaps Chad Payne just wanted to let curious fans know what he was inspired by, not necessarily trying to affirm his filmmaking ego with more niche cinema periods, this could be the case, but I don't think it's too generous to assume that since most of the media referred to does manifest in some form within the currently released movies in the series, the ones that haven't been explicitly that we discussed will appear in some form in Murder Inc. These are potentially messages Fortress Films wants to send viewers about their view of the world, and potentially more importantly to viewers of this video, how Emesis Blue may finally conclude. Let's dive into some more concrete Murder Inc. predictions and solidify some of our theories we developed in this video. I know some of these theories seem far-fetched, but I really do think that it's all part of the fun and the benefit of having Easter eggs to look into. After all, the results we have found don't seem like the most outlandish predictions, and I feel pretty confident with most of them. The main scene setting for Murder Inc. that we can gather based on our theories are: the Gravel Wars are coming to an end. Dust Bowl and Twofold have been destroyed. Both Redmond and Blutarch are dead alongside Archibald, but the CIA is still involved, even if the current corporate land and structures are being dismantled. At least one Respawn machine is still functioning, and the Respawn core means you don't actually need to be reproduced in another body. Murder Inc. likely takes place almost 10 years after Emesis Blue, in Texas, where the Conagher Brothers are from, who have in-depth knowledge about the Respawn machine in a dystopian future where a syndicate of organized crime, a Murder Inc., with influential member Jimmy, attempt to take down and dismantle the corporate elite that has caused the degradation of humanity through cloning and respawning, potentially leaving almost all of original humanity wiped out, giving Jimmy no other option other than to fight for the victims of cloning to tie up all loose ends in a smoking gun. The idea of taking down a system of corporate elite seems too far-fetched based on what we've covered. There is another pretty direct pointer in the description of the most recent Murder Inc. teaser, simply saying, take a look at the bigger picture. Another time the film could take place is only around 5 or 6 years after Emesis Blue, as a newspaper in the trailer seems to have a headline that could say, Kennedy assassinated. JFK could be a media distraction to draw attention away from the Respawn machines like the false Mariah in Metropolis. It would also make sense for Miss Pauling to be helping Jimmy, with them potentially being in a forbidden relationship, as we know that in the original TF2 timeline in the comics that she disagrees with the use of Australium in the Eternal Gravel Wars, hiding the Australium from the Administrator. That being said, Murder Inc. was definitely already written by the time this was revealed in the TF2 comic, so it's possible that in this Emesis Blue timeline, she could be working with the Administrator's establishment, supposedly somehow merged with the CIA at this point, trying to hunt Jimmy down to stop him. And that's what the photos are, evidence of his crime scenes to try and form the bigger picture to try and stop him. I vote the first option though, as she is seen burning evidence, though Miss Pauling is seen among the elite on the newspaper I mentioned just now. The story will likely have focus on paranoia and not knowing who to trust. I can also believe that the absolute ending of Emesis Blue's franchise in Murder Inc. will be a good one, if it continues to mirror the legend of the Faust movies, with love and divine grace coming out on top over the devil and evil. Although there is a bad ending in Metropolis, this is due to an orchestrated distraction, almost as a red herring, and I don't believe that the respawn machine is a distraction in the Emesis Blue series. Sure, JFK could be, but that's not a theory I'm too convinced by, and even if it is, the many people affected by the respawn machine can't be that distracted by it. Surely they'd want to just keep going for the respawn machine to make sure that it does get taken down. I could also believe that the medic from Emesis Blue and the Spies Disguise will appear again after being respawned in flames at the end of Emesis Blue. He's likely even more crazed, disillusioned, and unstable than ever, as hinted at in this picture of a medic with the words bonkers plastered over him, as if he's being taunted by many in this future. Bonkers obviously could be a reference to Scout's bunk, but why would it be above the medic? Jimmy also holds a briefcase in the first trailer, similar to the one the respawn core is kept in, but my gut feeling tells me that this isn't what is inside of it. I also think the S009 from Spies Disguise could return to this series, potentially undercover as a Red Engineer. So those are my main predictions and theories for how Emesis Blue might end through Murder Inc. A couple of cool fan theories I saw in the comment section of Murder Inc. trailers are that the hitman Jimmy is having to kill off the rest of the mercenaries one by one. This obviously doesn't sync up with my theories, but it's a really cool one. It would be a simple yet very entertaining concept and makes complete sense if it were to happen after the respawn machines are dead and the mercenaries once again cannot respawn and once killed are dead forever and they're trying to be taken out for the last time. Another theory suggests that the JFK theory is true and that the final image that Miss Pauling handles is actually a real picture of Lee Harvey Oswald, a supposed assassin of JFK. Another couple of people also suggest that the Scout was the actual assassin of JFK, and that's the real reason he was put on death row to begin with, which fits in with one of my theories in this video regarding Oryx and Craig references in the Toast theory. Other theories suggest that it was Archibald who killed Kennedy, directly or indirectly, as in a conversation with Plutarch in Emesis Blue, he proclaims that he wants Kennedy out of the picture. There are various fan theories that you should look into if you are curious. If you like the idea of humans being blended with machine, you should check out my 2-part series on Capture the Intelligence, TF2's most terrifying horror game that includes a corrupted engineer that blends flesh and machine to create a freakish army of his creations. It also looks at the inspirations that creator drew from and how that inspiration ended up almost becoming part of the lore and the characters itself. If you enjoy knowing the creative process similarly to what we explored in this video, it'll be perfect. The same goes for TF2's scariest horror map, Crypto Forest, where the creator goes into his creative process and inspirations. In fact, creating and following inspiration and understanding where that comes from is a lot of what my channel is about, even down to what makes things scary itself, like when we explored liminal spaces in real life. Subscribe if you want more of that, and thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it. I normally try and take a long time editing these, but I thought this would be nice as just a chill one for you guys to enjoy, and hopefully it comes out before Murder Inc. is released. Have a great day. Have a lovely day.